My name is Stephen Persh, and this is a companion video to the book How to Build Your First Surfboard.
Templates.
We're here at Surfside Beach, Texas, and what I'd like to do today, if you allow me, is make a surfboard template. Some people skip this step, but I highly recommend you don't. Many of them that skip it aren't happy with the board they made. If you've got a molded polyurethane blank that's close to shape, you can get away without doing this. Otherwise, please don't skip it. Please remember that the most important part of shaping your blank comes before you ever touch the foam. So what you need to do this template is 30-pound roofing felt, tape measure, scissors. I'd like to encourage you to use an existing board for your template. Instead of doing measurements on that board, actually lay that board down on the roofing felt and trace the outline out and trace the rocker out. If you do this, it'll be a lot less prone to error and it'll be much faster. In order to do the tracing, you need a torpedo level with a pencil taped to it. When you do the rocker, you'll need to tape a mixing paddle to the level also. Remember, if you have the surfboard, you don't need to make a lot of measurements. It's more accurate and easier to make a tracing. So take your surfboard and line up the center of the surfboard with the machine edge of the roofing felt. We're only going to do 1/2 the outline. This ensures symmetry. Okay, check to see that you're sitting on relatively level ground. And remember, the trick to this as you're doing your tracing is to keep the level bubble between the lines. It'll bounce around a little bit, just go slow, you'll get the hang of it. Remember to get your fin angle. You can do this by cutting a piece of roofing felt to match the fin angle, which will be about 4 to 8 degrees. Do this by leaning it back to the same rake as the fin. If you do it at 90 degrees, you can see it's not the same angle. That's because the fin is thinner at the front and the back. Okay, what you want to do now is mark your fin box locations. So take your fin out of your board and put your template down on top of your board. Feel around for the box hole and determine where the center of it is, the exact center. You may have to poke little holes to find the exact center of that box, and once you determine it, draw a line down the center and poke 2 little holes where you want the outside middle edge of your fin box to be. Later you can just lay this down on your board and mark out those points and you won't have to measure anything. Okay, what we're going to do now is trace out the outline of the rocker. So turn your board rail up and get 2 towels and roll them up and put them about 2 feet from the ends, and get 2 buckets or whatever else and brace it. This will stabilize it and keep it from moving. Also, you need to get a mixing paddle and tape it onto your level and pencil. So get the board level and keep the level and the mixing paddle flat against the surface of the board, and drag it along with both hands along the entire circumference of the board, top and bottom. When you come to an obstruction such as a towel or a bucket, just go around them. Later, when everything is removed, you can just connect the lines. The reason why we need this mixing paddle is because in places the curvature of the board is so far away from the floor on the nose and the tail ends that the level will not even touch. So we need an extension.
My friend Steven.
I want to show you how to make a really easy rack out of plastic buckets And this rack will do everything that the wood racks will do, but it's a lot easier to make. So just figure out how thick the board is that you're going to be using in it, and make it the same thickness. Don't make it bigger because it flexes out and it'll hold it really stiff in there. So get a saw. Any saw that'll cut foam or wood will work. This stuff actually cuts easier than wood. And you want to make sure you don't go past the handle. Make it about a 1/2 inch above the handle. And just cut down the lines. And once you've cut down both sides to this line here, just pull it over and cut it off with the tension pulled over. Okay, this is what it's going to look like after you cut it out on both sides. And you can see the edges have been rounded off. I did that with a power sander, but you can do it with a saw also. And what we're going to do now is we're going to put pipe foam insulation all along the edge of this. So once you get that down there, when the edge of your board is down in the bottom of this thing, you know, and you're pressing down on it really hard, maybe you're sanding it, you should put 2 more layers of pipe foam down in there so that you don't dent your board on that hard edge if you smash it down too hard. You'll need some duct tape to tape over the bottom pieces to hold it all down, both sides, and here where the pieces join together. I recommend you use one continuous piece of foam. It'll take about 5 feet, and then cover the whole thing with duct tape, a couple layers of it. When it's all done, it should look like this, pretty much. Put sand in the bucket up to a level about 1 inch below the top of the foam. The other buckets don't have to have any weight in them, but it'll be more stable if they do. This top bucket has to have weight in it or you will not be able to put the board on edge.
Polystyrene.
Before we start shaping, please allow me to go over what are probably your most practical choices. These are 1/12 scale models. 1 inch equals a foot. You can make your board out of 3 different kinds of foam: polyurethane, expanded polystyrene, or extruded polystyrene. I recommend polyurethane. It's your #1 choice. It comes mostly shaped. The rocker, the outline, the rails, the stringer, everything is roughed in. You just need to do the fine details. It's a good foam. Expanded polystyrene is probably your next best choice. It comes with the rocker hot wired in, but they usually don't do the outline or the rails, so it's a bit more work. You can see the beaded structure. I left it rough so you can see. Expanded polystyrene is especially good for block foam boards because you can get it in any length, width, or thickness. So it's easy to get your rocker in and to make a stringerless board. It is not a good foam, however, if you fracture your board a lot, because it does tend to absorb some water. For a board that is more water resistant, extruded polystyrene is very good for that. But the drawbacks are that it doesn't come in lengths over 8 feet or thicknesses over 4 inches. So you may have to bend the foam to get the little bit extra rocker in it, which I'll show you later in the film. If you order a polyurethane board, it'll arrive looking something like this. It'll be rough. It may have a crust on it, it may not. If it has a crust, the easiest way to get that crust off if you don't have a planer is to use one of these little hand planers and just set the blades at the shallowest place, and it'll just peel that crust right off there. If you just want to remove the roughness, you can use a number 12 if you don't have a planer. You don't need a planer to shape a surfboard. Absolutely do not need it, a power planer. Notice that this blank has a 3/8 inch stringer in it. Please do not order a board with a really big stringer like this. This little piece of blank is heavier than the entire blanks that I'm finishing now for like 8-foot boards. So it's better to go with no stringer or a light stringer or a glue joint and go with heavier cloth. The board will be stronger. This is the polystyrene section, and I'm going to show you how to shape a surfboard the hard way using extruded polystyrene foam. That's what this is, Dow Blue board or square edge. It's 1-inch sheet and 3-inch sheet. We're going to glue the sheets together face to face, and then we'll glue them together edge to edge. Okay, it'll really help you when you're gluing these sheets together to keep track of where your template and where your glue is on the sheets by marking nose top on each sheet that's facing up. Also, it's really important to use the machine cut edge to glue together edge to edge. Before you glue the sheets together, you want to get your template that you made out of 30-pound roofing felt and lay it on the sides that you're going to glue. You don't want to glue the sheets together totally. You want to keep the glue about 2 inches inside the edge of your template. That way when you go to shape it, you won't be hitting the glue, and it'll be much, much easier to shape. Just mark it out with a Sharpie pen. Now you mark the template out on the other two pieces, the 1-inch and the 3-inch. Okay, we have the lines drawn out to show us where to put the glue. We've drawn the template on the interior of the foam. So now we're going to mix up the epoxy. And we've got part A, epoxy resin, and part B, hardener. So I know that we need about 6 ounces to do it. And to figure your hardener, you divide the total by 3. So 6 divided by 3 is 2. 2 is the amount of hardener. 2 from 6 is 4. 4 is the amount of resin. So it's a 2-to-1 mix. That's a good way to figure it, whether it's a hot coat, gloss coat, laminate. Okay, we got our 6 ounces mixed up, and what we're going to do is pour out 3 ounces. We're going to try to keep it away from the line at least 2 inches, okay? I'm going to pour out the 3 ounces. Okay, it's a really thin amount, so you've got to really work it around and get it even, keep it away 2 inches away at least. You've got everything all spread out. You're ready to put the other sheet on there. Line it up. Okay, I'm going to do the other one now. Same bat time, same bat channel. Just like we did the other one. Line it up. No problem. Now we're going to put it on the floor. As you notice, I put some cardboard on top of the foam, and we check the edges, make sure there's nothing running out. If it is, we just wipe it off with some paper towels. I put the cardboard on there just to protect it in case a sharp edge bites into the foam. The epoxy on the sheet faces is now dry, so I'm going to cut off a little bit of excess foam, and then we're going to get ready to glue these two pieces together edge to edge. As you go along, you're going to find it helpful to have a really long, flexible straight edge that'll bend around the curves. You can use a 1-inch piece of plastic molding. It's great, it's cheap. And your roofing felt, you can just cut a little 2-inch piece of it, however long you need. You can have a shorter one to, you'll see how we'll use this later on the rocker. Or you can just have a nice straight piece of foam that you can draw with. Just lay it on there. Get a nice straight line. You can cut this foam with any kind of saw. Now you get your rocker template and you lay it out on your machine edge and draw it out in pencil. Don't use the pen because it will make the ink bleed. And that's how you'll know where to put your epoxy. I'm going to go into a lot more detail about the rocker later. Okay, the sheets are ready to be glued together edge to edge, so I'm going to mix up about 3 ounces of epoxy resin. I'm going to paint it on inside the lines about a 1/2 inch, and then I'm going to stack the halves on top of each other and put weights on them. Leave it until it dries. So you can see it's stacked together edge to edge, and this would be better if you had clamps, but you can see you can do it even with primitive tools. So you can see now that the pieces are glued together face to face and edge to edge. And I also hope you see that we're at the point now where we would have been if we just had one sheet of foam. And if you're going to use block foam, I recommend that you try your best to get one sheet, one block, and don't cut it and make a stringless board. It's much, much easier.
Shaping.
I highly recommend, before you put the template on the blank, draw a line across the bottom of one end of the blank, and then get a square, line that line up, draw a line, and draw another line across the bottom that's exactly lined up with the line on top. If you don't do that, everything's probably going to be off a little bit. If you've got everything lined up on a perfect machine edge, you'll probably be all right. Otherwise, you're going to have problems. We're going to use the alternate method mentioned in the book, and we're going to save a little labor by laying out the outline template first, and then we're going to do the rocker. So get your template, line it up on the center line, and mark it out with a Sharpie. We'll flip the blank over and do the exact same thing on the other side. As you can see, we have an experimental design as mentioned in the book, and that's one of the big advantages of using block foam, is that you can make a shape that would be impossible with molded foam or partially pre-shaped polystyrene blank. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a handsaw and cut about a 1/2 inch outside the lines, and we're going to keep looking underneath to make sure that we don't get it crooked. Try and keep your saw at a 90-degree angle. One thing you can do if you start cutting a little too close to the line on the bottom is just bend your saw out a little bit. And now you've got your basic outline cut out. And what we're going to do now is turn the board rail up. And we're going to take it down to the lines, right to the edge of the line with number 12 sandpaper, if you can get it. Number 16, number 20 is okay, 12 works the best. You notice that I'm trying not to scrub in one place. Then you scrub there, and then you scrub here, and pretty soon you just got wavy places all over. You start out doing everything very evenly, it'll be a whole lot easier in the long run. At this point, dust is going to start going up everywhere. So if you've got anything that needs to be covered up or you don't want dust in, you need to cover it now because it will get in the smallest cracks. It'll get places you can't even imagine. And please wear a dust respirator, not a dust mask. I mean, you'll really, I think you'll thank me later. Well, about now you might be cursing me and saying, why did he have me cut so far from the lines? Well, it's because I've seen a lot of people doing it their first time and they cut inside the line on the bottom and they really screwed up their blank bad. And another thing is with the 1/2 inch of foam, you've got a lot of time to get used to shaping it and get the feel of getting it smooth and getting all the lumps out of it. That if you're careful, you can go back or on your original cut a 1/4 inch from the line, but you're going to have to keep looking underneath to make sure you don't cut into that line. Okay, as you're going along, level your racks and then check to see if the edge is at 90 degrees. And do that before you get it down right down to the line, so that if it's a little off, you know, you can make it 90 degrees even if the lines don't line up. If the lines don't line up, it means you didn't get the template to line up. You want to be careful about that when you put them on. Okay, we're going to do the alternate method. We're going to use a thinner blank and we're going to bend the foam later. We cut the outline first and then we're going to put the rocker on. But the rocker template will not go on a curved surface, it just won't work. So you can either measure points or do another method that I'll show you in a minute. If you want to do the point method, you mark points at 3, 6, 9, 12, and 18. Make them right angles and then go down with a square. And I have a 5-inch rocker I need at the end, and then I have a 3.5 at 3 inches. So there's an 1.5 inch difference, so I drop down an 1.5 inch. And at each one I add on the differences and draw points. And then I draw lines between those points, and that's my rocker. If you want to save yourself a lot of trouble, get yourself a piece of about 2 feet by 1 inch piece of roofing felt and line it up near the tip and then on the 18-inch mark, and you'll find that it's going to follow probably this very close to this rocker dimensions that you plotted on there. It creates a nice smooth rocker that increases exponentially as it gets towards the tip, and that's what you want. I'm going to show you a bunch of different ways to remove this foam. You can just get a 5-inch rubber or plastic backup pad, and this is number 20 paper right here. You can use a big power sander. That's number 16, by the way. This is a Hitachi planer that's modified for foam, and this is your trusty number 12 block. And with this, you're a lot less likely to make any big mistakes. These other tools, if you're not used to them, you can really screw your board up real quick. And of course, your trusty number 12. Your number 16 block works really well also. Number 12 can be really hard to find. Please don't forget to put some weights on the blank, or else you might find it on the floor. Okay, when you're about an 1/8 inch from the line, you want to stop using your machine and just go with your hand sanding, and then just bring it down right to the edge of the line. And what you'll notice in here is you'll have a little facet, or you might have some little faceted places on your foam after you use the machines. You can just level them out and just make the curve blend. Okay, you notice that we've got the rocker rough sanded in the nose. And don't be concerned with it being really rough. It won't be this rough when it's finished, but it'll be rough. It'll be rougher than a normal surfboard. And we want it that way because this foam has a tendency to delaminate, and it'll make it bond way better to have it rough. What we're going to do now is we're going to flip the board over, and we're going to plane about a ½ inch off of the top. Okay, we're going to measure our 3½ inches from the bottom, about every 2 foot along the length, and then we're going to connect it using a flexible straight edge, and we're going to blend it into the last foot of the nose. You don't want to take foam off the tip of your nose or you'll lose your rocker. So when you finish marking all the way around the blank, we're going to flip it top side up and plane off all that excess foam using the same method that we used when we planed down the nose rocker. And once you get the top plane down to your line, you're going to draw in your rocker for your tail. So just take your rocker template, line it up, but remember that if you bend the nose, the tail is going to bend also. It's going to bend about 1 inch. So you have to decrease the amount of rocker in your tail by about 1 inch. You just drop your template down 1 inch and then blend it in. After you get the rocker for your tail planed in and sanded down, I highly recommend that you mark what will be the furthest protruding rail points all the way around the circumference of your blank. On this blank, the rails are going to be very round, so the points are going to be dead center all the way down the rail. After you get your points, you just connect them together using a piece of roofing felt. I've had people question whether this step is necessary. All I can tell you is skip it at your own peril, because if you get one lump in your rail, you aren't going to believe the trouble it's going to cause you. Just do it. And once you get your furthest protruding rail points marked, it's time to start creating the curvature of the rails. And the safest tools I would most recommend on your first board is your number 12 block or your number 16 block. And what you'll be doing is running your block all the way down the rail, and you'll let up as you get to the thinner points on the nose, and especially on the top side where the rail starts to turn up on the nose curvature. There's a tendency to gouge a dip here, so go really lightly on the top side here and just let up as the blank bends out. Just run 10 times on one side of the rail and then 10 times on the other side of the rail. Flip the board over, keep counting and running the length and letting up where it gets thinner. You'll start to get the feel of it. Just take your time. Yeah, I realize how much labor is involved in doing the rails with nothing but hand tools. So if you're willing to take the risk, put a number 50 disc on your drill and get a scrap piece of foam. Don't do your blank without practicing first. You just get a scrap piece and start out real slow and with the real light pressure, and then build up speed and pressure. I'm going to show you in miniature how this is going to work. Start out real easy. And then just take your block and even it out. There you go, you got 20 passes on each side and a little sanding with the block, and it's pretty round. Okay, now we've got the curvature of the rails roughed in, and you can see that on the tail and the nose the curvature is the same. It all just meets in the middle. It's a very thick board. What we're going to do now is we're going to turn the board over. We're going to have it outside in the sunlight, and we're going to line the board up exactly with the sun so that we can see any dips and bumps in it very easily. We're going to use our number 50 long block, 24 inches long, and a long level. You don't have to have a level, but anything nice and flat will work. Even your long block you could use. So be careful that the board doesn't blow off the racks. If you leave it, put a brick or something on top of it so the wind doesn't blow it off. Okay, now we have the curvature of the rails roughed in, and we've got the board outside in the sun, and we're going to line the board exactly with the sun so that we can easily see any dips and bumps by using the number 50 long block, 24 inches long, or a long level. So on this blank it's going to be really easy because the top and bottom are very flat rail to rail. Also, at this point you might be asking me, is he going to show me any more how to remove this material? Well, one thing I can tell you is practice, practice, and don't practice on your blank, practice on scrap pieces of foam. A really good way to practice is make a 1/10 scale model and then shape it down to an actual surfboard. You can use that later when you do your glassing. It'll really help you to practice on the glassing too. The most important thing is to take your time with your templates, get them on the blank straight, and trust your lines once you get them on there. Don't sand or cut inside those lines, and everything will be great. Okay, starting on the bottom, I'm going to run the long block lightly up and down the blank over the entire surface of the blank, back and forth, and this is just to get it perfectly flat. After you've run it longwise, turn it sideways, run it crosswise. Length to length, real lightly, just trying to take down high spots. Here we go. Good job. Excellent. After you've done your longwise and crosswise strokes, you can get a long level or anything that's nice and flat, your torpedo level, and run it up and down the board and look underneath it and see if you can see daylight. You know, if you can see anything that's more than 1/8 of an inch off, mark the high spots with a marker, and then when you come back you just sand those spots off. Do it longwise also. My rails are just a little high. Okay, the high spots on this board are all the way down, or most of the way down both rails. And if you're pretty far past 1/8 of an inch off, you can knock it down real quick with your 16 or your 20 grit, and then come over it with your 50 long block. Okay, flip the board over and do the same thing on the other side. Just be really careful where the nose starts to curve up, because your block, no matter how small it is, it's not going to fit around that curve unless you turn it sideways. So what'll happen is you'll gouge a dip into your blank right there where it starts to curve up. I've Almost everybody that does their first board does that. So stop before you get anywhere close to that. Just do the last 2/3 of the board and then do this part with it turned sideways. Okay, take your 50 long block and run it down the length of the blank lightly, letting up as you get towards the nose, and just make very light passes end to end and count 10 times on each side. You're just trying to remove any lumpiness out of the rail. After you've done all 4 rail halves, make sure the board's lined up with the sun. That'll make it really easy to see any uneven spots. And go back over it until you get those lumps out. Once you get the lumps out, then you can start going over your black line very lightly. Try not to completely erase it, but get it even right there in the middle of the rail. Both sides, 10 times each side. Sometimes even if you can't clearly see a lump, when you put your long block over it, you'll feel it seesaw a little bit. There's usually a high spot there. Like there's a little one right here. If you get back and look at it, you can just make a little mark on it with your Sharpie. Come back. Very slowly blend it. Blend it into the hole. Okay, please allow me to caution you one more time. When you get to where the nose is curving up, don't take your long block and push it into that curve. You'll create a dip and a gouge in there, and you will have a nightmare getting that out of there. So stop before you get there. Just do on the top, just do the back 2/3. Keep turning your board different directions, keeping it lined up with the sun. And I don't know if you can see it, but right in here there's a small dip. So I'm going to mark this, take this down a little bit, and try to blend that dip into the hole. Very lightly. Keep walking back and looking at it. Stand it up and look at the outline real close. Kind of get back from it. Turn it around, do the same thing. Keep it lined up exactly with the sun. Okay, the lumps are gone now, and we're going to start doing the fine details. Get a 50 grit, 4-inch wide strip of sanding belt and force it to conform to the curve of the board and walk it down the rail, easing up as you get to the thinner places on the nose and the tail. Do it 10 times on each side, and you can start erasing that black line that's down the middle of your rail. You can start working on the fine details around the nose. Wherever it gets less than about 1/2 inch, you probably ought to use 100 grit and just go real light, take your time, but it's the same. 10 strokes on each side, do everything exactly symmetrical. If you're using molded polyurethane foam, which is regular Clark or Walker foam, before you get down about 1/8 inch from your line, you'd stop so you'd be able to finish with your finer grit and put a nice smooth detail finish on it. But this is extruded polystyrene foam, and it's important to leave the blank rough before you glass it. That'll increase the bond. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a number 20 grit block on all the flats and the thicker parts of the rails. We're going to go really lightly on the rails or it'll tear it. We're going to do 50 with a very light 20 on parts of the rails. Well, how'd you get so good at that? Okay, you can see here where I've torn out little chunks of foam along this glue line, and need to repair that. If it was a little bit bigger, I would just cut little blocks of foam, glue them at the bottom and shape them down. Maybe put some tape around so I didn't sand down the foam around it too. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this patch and paint, lightweight interior exterior spackling, lightweight spackling, and it's color matched to the foam. You can get that done in a paint store. And I'm going to mix it 75% spackling and 25% just regular Elmer's glue. And that makes it very similar to the foam, and it sticks much better than the spackling itself. You should not use this spackling on the foam by itself. It'll want to delaminate if you do. Don't do it. I mean, not unless you're just got some little pinholes or something. The spackling is fine on EPS foam, or patching a small place on polyurethane foam, but on extruded foam, don't use it by itself. Okay, this stuff is really hard to color match, and the tendency is you'll think you've got it perfect and it'll be too dark, and if it's too dark, it's gonna, just trust me, it's gonna look really bad. So if you've got to err on the light side, it'll look much better on your patches. So I've got a little bit of spackling in there, color matched, and I'm just gonna put a little bit of Elmer's in here. Okay, when you get it right, it'll be almost just like chewing gum. So, it's really hard to put on. When you put it on with a putty knife or your plastic squeegee, you've got to wet the putty knife first, or it won't. It's just like bubble gum. It'll just stick to whatever. Just remember to keep that putty knife wet, or the stuff will never come off of it. If it's too gummy, just put a little bit more Elmer's in there. And don't use Elmer's for any big jobs, like to glue your sheets together. It's not waterproof. You see, we're going to leave it pretty sloppy, and then we're just going to sand it down later. You can't get this stuff, it's too gummy to get it even.
Bending. Rocker.
Okay, the board's shaped. Congratulations. What I'm going to show you now is how to bend this foam. Of course, if you're using a different kind of foam or a thicker blank, you won't have to do this. But if you can make a board the way I've made this one, you can do it anyway. So what we're going to do is, after we figure how much weight and where, we're going to laminate the bottom of the board, and then we're going to hang the weights underneath it, and when the lamination hardens, it's going to hold the bend. Okay, move the nose side rack back to the middle of the blank and line up the tail with the back stand. Get some paper towels so you don't stain your blank. Put some weights down and measure the distance from the nose tip to the floor. Write it down, and you can put weights on there until you get the amount of rocker that you want. Like that bends it 1 3/4 inches, which is what I need. And that includes a 1/2 inch of spring back. So I really need 1 1/4 inches. But can you see that bend? You could put 2 more weights on there, but that's the max. Don't use more than 4. Okay, I want you to see what happens when I put the weight on the nose. A foot back from the tail, this thing is almost dead flat, and I got only about a 1/2 inch of rocker back at the tail tip. So watch. Okay, that's 2 bricks. Yeah, So about 6 inches back, I put an inch more rocker in there. What you can do is you can manipulate how it bends by putting weights in different places. You can stack more weights towards the center and it'll flatten it out more. You see it flattening out? This is the way that the weights are going to be attached to the underside of the blank while you're laminating it. These are plastic anchors with a screw inserted. You should just cut the tip off. You don't need it. If your board's really thin, you can cut it off even more. You just tie your string to the screw. Screw it in the blank. Just measure from the halfway between the center line and the rail line on each side, one on each side on the tail. Okay, the best way to attach the weight to the nose is to get a mixing paddle, cut it off, get some wax paper or some masking tape. A little broken pencil really helps to tie a knot around it. Put a hole through your mixing paddle and just attach the string to your bricks. You cut about a 1-inch slit in the end of your nose, and I want to caution you, don't let it hang straight down, it'll just pull out. So you need to have a bucket with bricks or sand or something heavy in it below it. Just put it in that slit, drop the bricks in the bucket, and make sure the bucket's back a little ways so that when it bends, you know, it doesn't just pull off the end. You notice that it's holding the bend really nice.
Laminating bottom.
Okay, we're almost ready to laminate. Brush off your blank, get all the dust off of it, get your cloth ready. The cloth we're using on this blank is 2 4-ounce E cloth on the top and bottom and 2 4-ounce S deck patches. That layup provides more damage resistance in the areas where damage are most likely to occur, which is the deck. And it's a really good layup no matter what kind of foam you're going to use. Okay, roll out 1 layer of 4-ounce cloth across the entire bottom. It's going to be cut along the mid-rail. Okay, put 3 weights with paper towels underneath them. Try to keep your hands clean. Every little tiny piece of dirt will show up on this cloth. Okay, we're going to cut it mid-rail. If you just hold your scissors vertical at 90 degrees to the blank, and you just follow along the edge, it'll go right along the middle of the mid-rail. Every once in a while, cut off the excess because it'll hang down and it'll start bunching up there. Just go around the entire circumference of the board, same thing. The reason for the weights is to keep the cloth from shifting, and the reason we're cutting it mid-rail is so that we'll only have 1 layer overlapping onto the other side, and that makes it a lot easier to sand, and it'll make it easier to make your board look better. Roll out another layer of 4-ounce E-cloth. It'd be better to have this thing on the broom handle or hanging from the rafters, but this works too. Okay, pull your cloth about 2 inches past each end, and it'll greatly help if you get a clamp-on light and clamp it on a bucket and point it towards the cloth where you're going to cut. We're going to cut this cloth about an inch below the mid-rail shadow. Okay, cut a slit at your nose tip. Yeah, on most boards you just got to cut 2 slits at the tail corners. But since this board has so much curvature in the tail, you've got to cut it 5 times. And I just cut slits. I don't cut V's anymore. And that's what I recommend that you do, because if you cut the V too big, then you're going to have a problem. The slit, you may have a little more sanding, but you're not going to screw up real bad. Okay, we're ready to start saturating the cloth. And if this is your first lamination, I highly recommend that you practice on a little miniature surfboard with a little miniature squeegee. Don't laminate if it's hotter than 80 degrees. Make sure you got at least 10% more resin than what you think you need. Okay, I'm going to outline what's going to happen on the lamination, because I'm afraid you won't be able to understand me once I put the respirator on. So we're going to mix up 39 ounces of total resin and hardener, and I'm going to pour 3/4 of it in 2 concentric circles around the blank. Then I'm going to spread it out over the flaps as evenly as I can, as quickly as I can, and try to keep it from running off the rail. Then I'm going to take the other quarter resin that's left in the cup and pour it along the rail and saturate the overhang, and then wrap that overhang around and make it adhere to the underside of the rail. Then I'm going to drag the excess resin out and try to get the resin all even. Then I'm going to hang the white from the nose. Don't get it too close to the nose or it's all going to run off. I want you to notice I'm holding the squeegee at a 45-degree angle, and I'm just pushing the stuff across. 1, just do about 2 feet at a time so you can keep up with it. Don't try to get it all perfect right now. You'll
You're going to have a whole lot more bubbles in a board that's made like this because the blank is so rough, and it'll just take a little extra time to get these bubbles out as we go along. You can see it's bending the squeegee.
Okay, the rails are wrapped, but we still have a few bubbles, and we've still got a few places where it's a little bit richer resin and a little drier. So we need to drag some of the resin out of the cloth and put a little bit of resin in the drier spots where there's maybe some little tiny bubbles. You need to get down on the surface of the board really to see the resin-rich areas. You hear that sound? Sounds almost like a zipper. That's what you want to be hearing. So you're like that, there's a little bit too much resin in there. When you get that dull sound, you've got too much resin in there. And if there's too much resin, it creates a floating bond between the cloth and the foam, and it actually makes your board weaker. It's best to get that resin out of there and get that zipper sound on your cloth. I want to show you a little bit about wrapping the cloth on this tail area, because this is you're probably not going to see anything harder than this on a surfboard. So we've got 3 little segments, and you need to separate them. Just leave the middle one, do the 2 ends. Sometimes you need to add just a little dab of resin on those corners. And don't worry about something like that. That's going to sand off there in an instant. When you're trying to figure out how much to bend your foam and how to measure it and how to check it after you've got your board laminated, this is the most accurate way. It's the same way as in the design section, except you're going to use a little tongue depressor or a cut off piece of mixing paddle to put under the board. So get a piece of EMT tubing, mark it dead center, put the tongue depressor dead center on the board, and put your torpedo level, magnetic torpedo level, dead center over everything. Slide it back and forth just slightly until that bubble is right dead center, and then get your measurements. And that'll work when you're laminating or before you're laminating, when you're just checking how much weight you need. Don't put the EMT down on the wet blank. Notice that the EMT is floating. If you don't have it floating, your measurement may not be accurate. On this board we allowed a 1/2 inch for spring back, but on your board, which is probably going to be more normal measurements, such as 2 to 3 inches thick and probably a lot narrower, you won't have that much spring back, probably not more than 1/4 inch. And you might be able to get all your bend simply by moving the racks in and out. You may be reluctant to try this method. I don't blame you. It's technically easier to use a 6-inch block, and it's a lot easier to shape a partially pre-shaped blank. But if you keep your mind open, be aware that it has been done for many years by Clark Foam and others. Basically what they did is they molded a certain amount of curvature in their blanks, and then they'd get a customer order for a rocker. They would make the stringer to that curvature. They'd cut the blank down the middle, they'd bend the foam to the rocker curvature, and then they would clamp the pieces together. Okay, the lamination on the bottom is dry now, and if you're bending your foam you need to wait at least 12 to 24 hours depending on how warm it is. So you flip your board over, and you can see the lap line here. This is one of the roughest places on this board, so it's a good example. And you need to sand that down, get a number 50 block, and just very lightly go along that line, getting the roughness out of it. And you'll notice that there's little hairs. You don't need to remove all those hairs. If they're sticking up like this one is now, then you need to sand it down. Otherwise, just get it so it's not sticking up. You don't need to sand your whole board, but you do need to go around the entire lap line, and you need to get the tail, corners, nose tip, and any drips, lumps, get it all smooth, get it all nice and flat. If you're going to go without a gloss coat, as we are on this board, then you need to be especially careful and get everything super smooth. And I'm going to very lightly sand even the flat part of the board. One little trick you can use, if you've got a place of buildup and you're right near the foam and you're worried you're going to sand into the foam, or maybe you already have sanded into the foam a little bit, you can just get a little piece of duct tape and put it in that area, and that way it's virtually impossible to sand into the foam then. Once you go around and get the worst of it with the block sander, then take a piece of 50 and just do it by hand. Just run your thumb or finger right along the edge. Be careful of these little sharp hairs. Everybody I've ever seen do their first board jams one of them deep into their fingers. Where you have a lot of excess resin buildup, such as on the nose here where we're hanging the weights off of it, you could use your drill sander with a 120, 150, or 220. Just don't go coarser than that. You're going to have problems. Just use the drill only for the very roughest places, just to get them. Don't go down to the cloth with it. Just get the drips and the really bad places with it. Finish up hand sanding.
Laminating top.
We're ready to start laminating the top. The top's going to be the same as the bottom, except we're going to have 2 extra 4-ounce S-cloth layers for the deck patch. The deck patch is going to be pulled 1 foot past the center line, and it's going to be cut at about a 45-degree angle from that point back to the center line. The deck patch is going to be cut at mid-rail, and then the next 4-ounce E-cloth, which is a full length, is going to be cut also mid-rail, and then the final 4-ounce E-cloth is going to be cut with a 1-inch overhang. On all these layers that are cut mid-rail, don't cut them exactly the same place. You know, like make it about a 1/4 of an inch difference if you can, 1/8 of an inch. Make sure you don't mark on the cloth with a pen or pencil. You'll be sorry. You can just use the rounded end of a scissor and just scratch the cloth along a straight edge. It makes a nice visible line and it'll disappear when you laminate it. The deck patches are cut and they're about a 1/4 inch difference. We're going to roll out the E-cloth and we're going to cut it about a 1/4 inch longer than the deck patch. No problema. Save anything that's more than 4 inches wide for when you do the fins. Cutting a 1 inch overhang on the last 4 ounce. We're ready to start laminating the top. Everything's going to be the same as it was on the bottom, except we've got 4 layers of 4 ounce back here, so we're going to have a lot more bubbles and we'll have to work on it a little bit longer. I'm going to show you a few highlights from laminating the top. Hopefully it'll be a little clearer, the light will maybe a little better. Most first-time builders are able to figure out how to get the resin around on the flats, but when it comes to wrapping the rails, they find it very mysterious. Just with your 25% resin that you saved, just pour it along about every foot or two, and then daub it onto the cloth. Just take your time and make sure that it's saturated all the way around before you wrap it. And when you get done, take your light and go all the way around underneath and check that lap line, because it's very common that that lap line doesn't get saturated properly.
Here we go. Another method that works well is just dip the squeegee in the bucket. No muss, no fuss. Work from the center of the rail towards the nose, and then towards the tail, and then on the other side. And wipe the excess off in the bucket. Now it'd be better if I went around and cut the threads first. Center towards the nose, and then the center towards the tail, and then on the other side, same thing.
Fins.
We're going to cut the fin boxes in now. It doesn't matter whether you do it after the laminate or after the hot coat. We're going to use Fins Unlimited 7-inch boxes and 7-inch molded cutaways. This is going to be cut down to 6 inches later. Use a Future Fins box. If you do, it's got the angle already set in it. This box you have to set the angle yourself, but I like the fin better. I got the locations by making this template. This is all custom just for this board. Just lay it out on this center line, put your 2 dots, draw a line between the dots, line up your box, and draw it out. Please allow me to show you an almost foolproof method of cutting in these fin boxes. This is the method that I recommend now. You don't need any machine tools. All you need is a single hacksaw blade, some duct tape, something to cut the hacksaw blade with or break it with, and some number 20 sandpaper. So cut the end of your hacksaw blade off with a pair of tin snips at 90 degrees. If you don't have any tin snips, you can just take a pair of pliers and break it off. You notice it'll have a little bend in there. You can straighten that out. If you cut the depth cutting side of your hacksaw blade at a 45-degree angle, it'll cut the foam much better. You're still going to use the flat side as a scraper. You can also use one of these. Wrap 10 layers of duct tape around the hacksaw blade at the box depth. This will keep you from overcutting your box depth. What we're going to do is cut about a 1/16 of an inch inside the lines and cut all the way around the outline. We're going to cut it a little small so we make sure and get a tight fit, and we're going to sand it with sandpaper to get it closer to perfect after we cut it out. Once you get your outline cut out, cut lines about 1/8 of an inch apart down the length of your box. And then when you're done with that, cut lines crosswise across those lines, about every 1/4 of an inch. If you start these lines in the middle and cut towards the outside, it's a little easier. They only need to be maybe 3/8 of an inch or 1/2 inch apart. Once you got that done, these pieces will just pull out of here. Just pull them out with your fingertips. It'll be real messy, but we're going to scrape it out later and sand it. Have your hacksaw blade, the 90-degree end. Don't scrape out past the bottom of your lines. We'll get that with the sandpaper. Okay, once you get it scraped out, take your sandpaper and try to fold it over so it's the same size as your box, or just a tiny bit smaller, and just fit it down in there and just sand it smooth. Do the same with the sides. And the ends. And that'll give you a reasonably good box hole. If you want a little bit finer detail, you can take a number 50 and get everything a little nicer. Try to make sure you get a snug fit on your box. There's a tendency to oversand a bit on the top edge, and that's because it's harder to get your finger down in the bottom. I recommend spending a little more time trying to get the bottom edges and corners nice and square and sharp, and go very lightly on the top edge. Please realize that although we had practiced putting this box in scrap foam, the sharp end of this hacksaw blade will penetrate the laminate or hot coat layer of the surfboard. And that's the way that I recommend that you put a box in, is in the laminate or hot coat layer with hand tools. Okay, we checked the box for fit, we checked the box for angle. We've got the box taped off with chemical resistant tape so no resin can get in. We've got the board taped off. We've got the board leveled, that's really important. We've got the light straight down the center of the board. We've got 2 layers of 4-ounce cloth for each side, and that's just enough to stick barely up out of the box once you cram it down in there. We've got wax paper that we're going to lay the cloth on, and then we're going to saturate it with epoxy. It's 6 ounces total for both fins, so 3 ounces for each fin, and about 1 ounce is going to go on the cloth, and the rest of it's going to get poured in the crack.
Okay, I'd like you to see how this cloth, the saturated cloth, is inserted in the hole. Now you center it over the box. Wipe your hands off. So you're going to be checking this fin, even if you had it covered up. You need to keep it clean. And that's it. You want to pour resin in the crack and make sure you fill up the box. Just pour it on both sides, pour it on the inside part and the outside. Do the other side, and then you come back and do it again, because it takes time for it to seep down in there. Okay, what you want to do is check the angle of your fin and then pull tape from the fin tip to the rail to hold that angle until the resin hardens. I've got 6 degrees, and that's what I want. You don't need to pull a lot of tension. Just get it just barely enough to hold it on there. Otherwise, you'll twist it, and you don't want that.
Okay, that's 6 degrees on each fin. And what we're going to do now is wait for the resin to turn rubbery, then we're going to pull the tape off. It's a good idea to get down at the end of the board with the light directly overhead, right dead center, and check it out. You can, your eye can see 1 or 2 degrees of non-symmetrical leaning.
Sanding.
Before you walk away from your fins, before the resin gels, wipe off the resin around the tape. It'll make it much easier to get that tape off later. Okay, the resin's set up now, the fins have been taken off, all the tape's removed, but I added tape back. I added this duct tape, and that's because the dangerous part about sanding off this cloth is that first timers tend to sand into the cloth around the fin box. Very common problem. Well, put a number 50 on your drill, number 50 grit sandpaper. Take your time, and if you start sanding into the duct tape, just stop and put more duct tape there. Of course, you can use a bigger sander. Also, you can get your number 16 block and just sand it by hand. When you get it down to about a 1/16 of an inch from the box, just stop. Don't use the machine anymore. Get some hand sandpaper. You could start out with something really rough, 16 or 20, and then work down to a 50 grit. And you're going to be a lot safer if you leave a tiny little ridge or leave the box sticking up just a fingernail thickness. You know, if you try to get it dead flat, a lot of people sand into the cloth around the box. It's probably not worth it on your first board to try to get it absolutely perfectly flush. This hand sanding around the boxes and around the rails when you're preparing your hot coat for your gloss coat, or you're finishing up your laminate and preparing it for the hot coat, it's just brutally hard work, and you're going to be tempted to bring your sander out and start sanding down around your rails or around your fin boxes down. Just don't do it. You're probably going to be sorry. A lot of people have sanded into their cloth, and some people have sanded all the way through their cloth into the foam. If you use a rougher grit, such as number 20 on your most uneven spots, you should be able to forego using the drill. That'll be a lot safer. If you're going to go with a hot coat only, you need to prepare your laminate almost like it's the hot coat. That's especially true on this board because we're not going to do any sanding on the hot coat except on the tape line once it's all done. On production boards, they usually light sand a hot coat on the board, but I don't recommend that you do it that way, because what happens is you'll barely sand into the cloth somewhere and it'll wick water through that cloth into the foam. It's a common problem.
Hot coat bottom out. No, don't do
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey!
That's good. That's good. Go ahead and get the
They're
top.
picking on me.
Get the top part now.
No, you can't use that.
Hot coat top.
You can't use the other one.
Well, I mean, it's on the film. You can. Okay, we're ready to start the hot coat on the bottom. You notice that there's tape all the way around the circumference of the board, and that it's hanging free on the bottom. It's a good trick to go around and just crease it in the middle all the way. Make sure that it doesn't get mashed down onto the opposite side of the board, because the resin will just run all the way onto the other side. Also, the fin boxes are taped off so no resin can get in. This is all chemical resistant tape. What we're going to do is mix up 18 ounces of total epoxy resin. We're going to pour the whole thing out on the board in concentric circles. And we're going to spread it out on the flats, pretty much like we did our lamination. We're going to use this poly brush, which is cheaper and works better on epoxy. So you're going to get it on the flats, don't let any run off, and then go 45, one complete board length, and then 45 the opposite way, one complete length, then crosswise, then longwise, and then around the rails twice, and one more time, very lightly, longwise and along the rails. Then we're going to check with the flashlight, make sure the tape isn't smashed down. And
don't pour a lot of resin on your nose because it'll just run off. Alright, we're starting our 45-degree strokes. Opposite 45. Crosswise. Longwise. If the brush starts bouncing, you're going too fast. Around the tape line, all the way around twice. One more time lengthwise, very lightly. With your flashlight, go around the tape line and look for the reflection of the flashlight in the resin. If you don't see that reflection, you might have a dry spot.
Hot coat top.
We're ready to hot coat the top now. Everything's going to be just the same as it was on the other side, almost exactly. Put the tape about 1/16 of an inch below the glossy line that was left from the coat on the other side. Don't try to put your tape right on that line, or it's very likely you'll have to go back and touch that up. One thing that's a little different on the top is at the bottom of the nose curve, the resin tends to run down and pool right here. You may not even notice it, but it'll be there. So on your long strokes, start at the nose and put a little extra pressure right here in this curve, and then let up as you go down towards the tail. And make all your strokes start at the tip of the nose and go towards the tail when you're going longwise. And that's the only main difference in the top and the bottom.
Sanding.
If you're gloss coating your board, you need to sand the hot coat. So put as many number 50 discs as you can on your drill, or as many pads of any kind. Build up the thickness. That'll help it stay flat on there. And what you're going to do is you're going to sand the flats only on the top and the bottom. Stay away from the rails. Don't sand the rails with a power sander, please. So you're going to keep it flat, and up on the curve of the nose, it'll start hitting the metal part in the center. So you'll have to put it on the edge just slightly. But keep it as flat as you possibly can all the way around. Get most of the shine off, and then go with your hand sanding block number 50. And when you're done with that, you'll still see probably some very small low spots that you can't sand into without sanding into the cloth above them. Just do them by hand. Just get the shine off the board and get it relatively smooth. A lot of the methods offered in this book assume you have a drill similar to this with a side handle, little depth gauge. Most of them that have side handles do have depth gauges. 2,000 to 3,000 RPM, variable speed. You can get one of these in 2006 for 30 bucks. It'll do everything you need. Well, you got the hard part done. And at this point, many people get fixated on making a perfect board. It's not the goal of this book to help you make a perfect board. I want to save you from board ruining mistakes and help you make a good functional surfboard. Please realize that many people I know have made an entire beautiful surfboard with no power tools at all, even though they had access to power tools. Basically what you do is you trade labor for speed and money. And it's a lot safer to go with the hand tools because it's less likely you're going to make a board ruining mistake. I feel like you're going to be a lot happier if you don't try to pursue a perfect surfboard, which probably doesn't exist anyway. Okay, this is the finished hot coat or the finished gloss coat. And what I recommend people do is just leave the top alone, because the vast majority of people just smear wax all over it anyway, so why bother? So on the bottom you may want that showroom board finished look, or you may want a sanded hot coat. Just be really careful. If you see that checkerboard pattern in the cloth, make sure you repair it. Don't leave it like that. What you're going to do is start out with a progression of cloths. And remember, because you're using epoxy and you don't have high-speed tools, you're going to have to use rougher grits. Epoxy is twice as hard to do as polyester. Start out with a 50 or 60 and just use that only on drips and really badly uneven spots. So you can go really light with that. You're going to do most of your work with your little disc sander. I've got 7 layers of paper on there, and that's to create a cushioning effect that makes it more like a foam sanding pad. That'll keep it flat on the slightly curved areas. It works really good. It's much cheaper than a foam sanding pad. Then you're gonna start out with about 100 grit paper and work up to a 220, and then you'll finish up hand sanding with the 220. You do the rails the same way. Don't power sand the rails. You work up from the 220 to a 400 wet and dry, and then you got the rubbing compound with the foam sander. Remember, if you can't find the recommended grits, you can just buy sheet paper and cut the discs out of the sheet paper. Just cut a little center hole and 4 slits about 3/4 of an inch. Okay, when you're doing your lap line on an epoxy board, you need to do most of the work with a 50 sandpaper. Just take it down until it entirely disappears. What a lot of people do is they reason that, well, I got to use 100 and 220 behind it anyway, so I won't take it down all the way. That way it'll be safer. But if you do that, you're going to be sanding forever. So just make it disappear with a 50. Don't use 50 on the flats. Use 100. And if you're using a polyester board, make it 200 on the flats and 100 to start on the lap line. There's lots of different ways to finish your board. For instance, you may have some cosmetic flaws that you want to cover up, but you don't want to redo the coat. You can just take your 400 wet or dry sandpaper and do the whole board, and it'll make a lot of those little flaws disappear. It'll make the whole board look more uniform. You won't have the high gloss finish, but it's that gloss finish that makes all those little tiny things stand out and make them bigger than they really are. If you want to try this wet or dry finish, get yourself a little container, put water in it, put it all over the board. Get something like this for your 400 wet or dry sandpaper, and stroke the length of the board. Just keep going back and forth. If it starts getting hard, put on some more water. The paper should slide on that water. If it starts getting hard, you don't have enough water on there, and if you let it dry out, it'll just tear up the paper and you'll just waste a lot of paper. After you do that for 10 or 15 minutes, come back and do it by hand. For maybe another 15 minutes or so. Don't be afraid to bear down hard. Keep it wet. It should slide easy on that surface of water. And when you get done, spray it off with water, dry it off real good, and then look for all the little shiny spots. Come back and hit those little shiny spots with your finger. So those kind of things are the imperfections that this 400 wet or dry sandpaper hide. Hey, this is Alec and Greg Bear, the people that edited the film. Here we go, it's ready.
If you keep an open mind to this traction idea, once most people try it, they don't go back to wax. You want to try either a number 16 or number 12 sandpaper, very coarse.
Come on, Alex, put some muscle into it, man. I'm gonna scratch it deep.
Use clockwise motions when sanding. This is how the texture should look when you're finished. When you're done, hit the rails with the number 50.
Leash plug.
Okay, I want to show you how to install what's got to be the easiest and most foolproof leash plug there is. And this is made by Official. Very simple. It's about $3 in 2006. What you need is about 4 inches of string, cup, 5-minute epoxy kit, pair of scissors, 50 grit paper, paper towel. First thing you want to do is sand it, and try to sand the center out of it a little bit so that it'll sit on the curvature better. If you've got a drill with 50 on it, that's even faster. And hit the edges. Next, you want to figure out where it's going to sit on the board. Try to put it as far back as you can, and just mark it out with a pencil, and then just sand it until the pencil lines disappear, and you'll be ready. Take your cup, cut it off about 1 inch until it's about 1 inch high. This is a 5-minute epoxy kit. It's got a pre-mixer on it, so the epoxy goes through this and it actually mixes it. You don't even have to mix it. It's really great. Okay, so all we're going to do is just dip it down in there and then just stick it right on. Just line up the holes with the center line. That's all there is to it.
This concludes the video, how to build your first surfboard. I messed up.
Sometimes the messed up parts are recording.
This concludes the how to build your first surfboard video. If you have any questions or comments, you can contact my friend Steven at www.surfersteve.com.